What are you drinking?
Well, I am drinking a bottle of Heaven's Door Ascension. So, Heaven's Door bourbon is a collaboration with Bob Dylan as well as some master distillers to create their own bourbon. It started in 2017, and Heaven's Door is getting a lot of real reviews that it's more than just a celebrity bourbon. The collaboration is with some people that are experienced in the bourbon industry, but also with a Redbreast Distillery, which is an Irish whiskey distillery. Yeah, so this Ascension bourbon is one of their newer blends, and it consists of some whiskey they actually distill at their new Pleasureville distillery, as well as another Kentucky bourbon from a non-disclosed source, but good stuff.
It sounds really good. I'd like to try some. Little more straightforward here, just a Brugal Anejo from the Dominican Republic. I think the best-selling rum for the Dominican Republic. Kind of an aged rum, but very light, very smooth, not a lot of heavy flavor. Yeah. So for a topic today, I thought, we're what, four episodes into this. We've probably got the maturity and the listener base that we can vary from our original idea. And we're just thinking about, how do we continue the conversation maybe in a different realm? And half jokingly, I threw out UFOs as a topic. But I actually think that there's something here. And so I'm going to pose this as a thought experiment question and say, because I'm actually pretty interested in some of the stuff that's come out of those Pentagon videos and so forth. But let's say we had incontrovertible proof today. The aliens come out, they make an announcement. Hi, we're here. We're from some other system. How do our current political institutions respond to that? And what happens to people? Do we become united as people who have to, is it like Independence Day and we've all got to work together to get rid of the aliens? Or does it just go our polarization to 11? What are your thoughts?
Well, as I was thinking about it, one of the other topics we threw around for today um, was foreign policy. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
about, couldn't we use the UFOs as a metaphor for foreign policy aims? Is your goal to uh, form an alliance with the aliens? Is your goal to isolate yourselves from the aliens? It starts bringing up, some themes that we see in foreign policy today.
I think you're right. In fact, that's kind of where I wanted to go with this. Like, how do you respond to that? A totally different kind of threat. And I love the idea of it as a metaphor because I really do think that, and we talked about this a little bit before, the Ukraine Russia war and America's response and the relationship with NATO, it's like it's new ground. I don't know what the right answer is to all of that, but there's not a historic playbook for this. I really feel like we're in a different territory. So maybe the aliens are the
Yeah.
right metaphor.
Well, and it becomes this, okay, so these guys show up. Is it a foregone conclusion that their presence is threatening to us? Is the existence of somebody else who, may or may not have a superior system, probably a superior system because they traveled here prior to us traveling there. So is the fact that somebody is successful using a different system and way of life an inherent threat to us?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and a kind of a corollary to that. And again, to extrapolate to foreign policy, United States has a kind of a hegemonic dominance of the world right now. If we could give that up and we could be number two or number three, but the advancement of all of humankind forward created a world that radically improved standard of living across the board. For example, right? Would we be happy with that, or would we rather be number one in a rate limited world, or would we rather be three in a world that can do things like cure cancer and time travel or whatever, right? Like what do you do about that?
Yeah, and would it be necessary for America to assert itself in dealing with the aliens, or would we be okay with China or Russia having the first contact with the aliens? You know,
Have you ever given serious thought to the whole extraterrestrial life thing?
I mean, to some extent, it's a bit arrogant of us to think that with a universe as broad as it is, that we're it. You know, it certainly seems theoretically possible, and from as a Christian who I'm a believer that God created the heavens and the earth, and that's not a I don't believe that that's a figurative thing. I think that's a literal thing, and obviously people may differ with me, but I don't think that God creating the heavens and the earth excludes the possibility that he could have done this someplace else. I mean, you know,
We
in
didn't
fact, there's
necessarily
probably
get an exclusive
uh,
deal.
right. If I'm him and I'm around forever, I think I might try this a few times to see what happens.
We might have been like draft number two of 50.
Well, and you wonder if if he has done this multiple times and he sets the rules up the same way, does the outcome take place the same way, essentially?
Hmm.
Like, is this, hey, I've done this same experiment 50,000 times over the last 3 billion years, and it's the same thing that happens every time, or is it wildly different?
So I don't know that I've really I can't say I've historically really put a whole lot of stock in it, but I guess I would agree with you. I think that the likelihood is high that there's other life out there. What I find really interesting are some of the scientific responses and discussion of that. So there's a famous oh, what's that called? The equation. There's an equation where a guy says it was a physicist, and he's like, the chances are the number of worlds times the number of those worlds that have planets that support our kind of life, and the number of those that would have, like all of the different limiting factors. And any way you slice it down, it still comes back to like millions of likelihood chances in the galaxy that there's life. And so, and then what
The
I thought
Drake
was really
equation?
Drake equation, thank you. But then the other part of that, the other side of that coin that I think is just really thoughtful is called the Fermi paradox, from Enrico Fermi from the Manhattan Project. And he said basically to the Drake equation, they said Fermi said this at lunch one day. He's like, where is everybody? If there's millions
Yeah.
of intelligent life forms in the galaxy, like where are they? And there's kind of two schools of thought of how do you answer the Fermi paradox. One is it's just not possible physically to travel across the kind of distances that we're talking about. You just can't do it. The other is that, yeah, they absolutely can travel here, but they realized that their presence would be so disturbing to our society that there's like this ethic thing that they've got to not let themselves be known,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting. And then you go to things like uncontacted tribes. I mean, we could do like the whole series of In Search of within the scope of one podcast. But, these uncontacted tribes, the famous one in the Indian Ocean where they've like killed everybody that's tried to visit them, and now it's illegal to go to this island, and they just
Yeah. Well, and that then becomes this thing of, does their mere existence represent a threat to us in some
yeah.
way? You know, like, would we need to blow them out of the sky? Who cares what they got to say? We got to get rid of them because they could be threatening to us because they're different or whatever. I mean, surely it'd be a national defense response, wouldn't it? I mean, it would be like secrecy. I mean, I think everybody would assume that it would be disastrous, so they would cover everything up. That's why I think the whole thing with the UFOs and the U.S. government, well, it's logical that they'd try to cover it up because one, you'd be worried about the impact on society, but two, wouldn't you also be thinking this could be a military game changer? So you'd want to cover it up. It just kind of avails itself to secrecy. Now, if they showed up in Times Square, it would be hard to make that a secret.
Yeah.
Well, the other piece I wonder about is, would there be a political dynamic? Like everything, like politics infects everything. It's like the COVID and the damn vaccine. Well, now you lean one way if you like the vaccine, you lean another way if you don't like. So then it'd be like, well, you believe in the aliens, so obviously you're a this, and if you don't, you're a this.
Right. The failed Biden administration allowed the ETs to come in. We've got to fix that.
Yeah, or the mega crowd denies science, so obviously they deny astronomical advancement, or something. Yeah, I mean, it's like,
Well, I have to say, and this was, I don't know if there was news this week or I just heard a discussion about it, but it's funny you should raise COVID because I think that I think parallels here. When Trump suggested the lab leak hypothesis, everybody went crazy, like, you're out of your mind. How dare you say this? I have to admit that even in the moment, I was like, well, I mean, maybe. And indeed, I think that I can't remember what the news was, but somebody came out with a panel that they're indeed looking at, the lab leak hypothesis is absolutely a possibility in the thing. And, you know, I thought in the moment, I thought the problem was, and again, I'm not really blaming Donald Trump, but like it was when he lays that out there as this kind of throws this thing out there, the truth is the first casualty. Immediately lines are drawn and everybody's like, oh yeah, it was the lab, or people are like, there's no way, it was clearly from a market. Like we don't have the self-discipline to take a breath and wait and kind of map out what the possibility is. We've already drawn political lines before there's even any evidence, beyond maybe plausibility.
part of it is okay, like UFOs, for instance. You wouldn't necessarily know what's going on at first. There would be a lot of speculation. And I feel like at the national political stage, and part of it is probably the 24-hour news cycle and the internet, but like at a presidential level, like they can't explore stuff. They can't be like, well, I wonder if this is the case. And Trump got in all kinds of trouble, because he's like, well, maybe there's some way they can, maybe there's some way they can bleach this out of it. Oh my gosh, he wants to pour bleach. He's an idiot. Or, like Kamala Harris will say stuff and okay, the criticism is it's all a word salad. You don't know what she's saying. Well, maybe she's formulating, just like Trump may have been formulating, but there's no tolerance for that because it's
Yeah.
like, okay, that person that is the president, if they say something it better be completely accurate and fully baked. And is that reasonable? And and if UFOs showed up tomorrow, there would be, even if you took, the Dr. Fauci of UFO, the phenomenologist, as they would talk about on Coast to Coast, they would take the seasoned phenomenologist and they'd be making all kinds of speculation. I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's no tolerance for any gray, and it just sets people wild.
Well, funny you mentioned that. Again, I'm kind of hopping from thing to thing, but when we were
Yeah.
setting up the episode, you kind of joked about, you know, Art Bell, George Norrie, and that. But you and I've said for years the thing about Art Bell before him and George Norrie now and some of those guys is that they will put the goofiest, craziest people on their show and just let them talk and just, yes, tell me more about that. Just like give them the, which when you hear some of the people that are talking, you're just like, how can you not just like jump all over these people and set them straight? But again, rewind what we just said. And one of the failings that we've got as a society right now is that we are incapable of dealing with ambiguity or um, open-ended questions, right? We expect both the president and the candidate to have all of the answers all ironed out according to a predictable pattern. So, I mean, maybe there's a role for a Art Bell like investigation of interesting topics.
Well, you've even said it. I mean, that's kind of why the Joe Rogan podcast is so appealing because he's not interrupting guests and fact checking them. He's like, hey, tell me what you think. And people talk. And, I mean, even to our own humble podcast to a degree, it's like, I think we benefit from hearing people's perspectives and not immediately judging them. It's easier said than done, but I feel like we're just at such a judgmental place as a country. It's like every freaking word somebody says, it better be 100% or you're an idiot.
You've done more business travel overseas than I have. Do you think this is a uniquely American phenomenon right now, or is this the spirit of the times we live in?
Yeah, I don't know that it's uniquely American. I think you see that in other countries too. The expectation level of their leaders is so high. Yeah, I don't know that it's us per se, although, everybody in the world, I do think our political drama is to a degree more, it's followed by everybody. I mean, even somebody in another country who's following their own political drama, they're still following our political drama. You read a newspaper in England and it's talking about Trump versus Harris, and it's like,
Mm.
well, they get their own crap to worry about. What are they worried about ours for? But ours is the kind of the universal reality show they're all watching to a degree.
So if that's true, that it's not just that our system is completely on the skids, that would give credence to the belief that one of the things that's driving our problems is, I don't want to put words in your mouth. We've talked about this kind of ad nauseum. I think the a la carte news cycle, you pick your commentator, you pick your viewpoint, and that it becomes such a dominant thing. Social media increases the echo chamber that we live in. I think if it's happening in other countries, you would expect it to happen in other countries if that's the kind of problem that's fueling this fire. So maybe that validates this hypothesis.
Well, and if you tie it back to foreign policy, it's kind of, you'd mentioned the Ukraine war, and I I think there's so many foreign policy issues, they're not black and white. And if you look at one administration to the other, I mean, there's a lot of crossover in things that people, thought were priorities or tried to do in a foreign policy environment. And I don't think I think there's actually other probably policy things that are a lot more black and white than foreign policy. Foreign policy, it's like what Reagan would have done is different than what Bush would have done, different than what Trump would have done, in the Democrat side too. I mean, how Carter viewed the world, how Clinton viewed the world, how Obama did. I mean, there's all differences and there's similarities between them too. So it's not as, I don't know. In a particular election cycle, there's certainly stark differences, but if you look over a historical spectrum, I mean, there's a lot of trial and error, and rightfully so, right? I mean, you don't know how it's all going to pan out. So there's people trying different things, and some things you look back, you say, well, that was a stupid idea, but how would you have known that if you hadn't tried it?
Yeah, I like that as a way of evaluating, that it is this kind of iterative trial and error process. In some ways, I think we've got a better handle on economics, macroeconomics at least. We've got a pretty good understanding of how the business cycle works and the interplay between interest rates and government spending and consumer behavior. But foreign policy, you've got different players at the table every time you roll the dice for that game. And uh, I still think, what are we? I don't know, how many years would you say we're into where the Middle East is driving the bus on most of our worldview? I mean, 50 years of this, that the Middle East is in general, the headline of our foreign policy concerns. And I still feel like we don't understand the stressors and and opportunities with the whole of the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, and there's just so much with that trial and error. There's so much tinkering that's been done by all the administrations, and a lot of it has just made matters worse. I mean, I was reading the thing about, trying to research in advance of our podcast. I was looking at past administrations' foreign policy and looking at Reagan and how, there was a point at which in the Iran-Iraq war, we were actively supporting Saddam Hussein and providing weapons. And there's this picture of Tariq Aziz, the diplomatic spokesperson for the Saddam Hussein region, sitting in the Oval Office with Reagan, and they're having like a fireside chat about how they're going to take care of things. And then that same guy, like 9 years later, is going to get killed by Saddam Hussein because well, whatever. I mean, it's like uh, you like these. They became like a stark enemy. Yet under Reagan, we were cozying up to them because we thought they could help us someplace. There's just so much of that. Well, who's our ally? Who's our enemy? It's like it depends on who you ask and when.
Well, a less sophisticated response to your observation there would be simply watch Rambo 3 sometime. Talk about not aging well, because it's Rambo helping the Mujahideen against the Russians, um, who later became
Yeah,
known as the Taliban.
yeah. I do. I mean, and then it does beg the question, like in in your introductory topic about UFOs, is it America's place to solve the world's problems?
Mm.
Like if the UFO landed in Mongolia, is it NASA and the CIA's responsibility to go square this away, or would we be okay with somebody else taking care of it? And I feel like there's a lot of people that feel as though, no, we're the universal good guys that are out there going to solve all the world's problems.
Yeah. Well, again, all kidding aside, yeah. First of all, who's on the podium for the briefing from the White House about the aliens, right? Is it the Secretary of Defense, and they've got the four-star from Space Command, and we've got this covered? Is it the Secretary of State? Is it and what
NASA
if,
administrator. Yeah.
right? And what if the aliens came and said, hey, our desire, we're this advanced civilization, we're going to help you reach our level of sophistication. And the way you do that is by a radical commitment to economic and social equality of people all around your world. Well, all of a sudden, now you've got a thing where if I'm people in extreme poverty in Africa, I'm like, let's go aliens. Yeah, and if I'm the US military and I'm worried about my dominance, the threat possibility, it's not universal for humans. Do we want change or not? And I think this goes back, this really does tie to our presidential election, everything else. Are you happy with the status quo, or do you want change? And pitting people against each
Oh,
other.
and all the side making to me is so fickle because I clearly believe if the alien landed, if Kamala Harris is the president and they land and they say, hey, we got a vaccine that cures cancer, every Democrat in the country is like, we got to take the vaccine. It's going to cure cancer. Everybody's got to do it. Republicans are going to be like, no, it's a scam. They're going to screw us up. They're going to infect us. They're trying to track us down and kill us. If Trump's in office, hey, everybody got to take this vaccine to cure cancer. No, that's crazy. You're going to take the alien horseworm or vaccine. It's going to kill everybody. Both sides would go crazy. People would try to inject politics even into something like that.
I do. I wonder though, at what level, at what point would it be so monumental that it would snap us out of our stupor in that way? Like, how big would something have to be
Mm-hmm.
to, people talk a lot about 9/11 and how that sense of national unity really,
Yeah,
this is a side rabbit hole that we don't need to go down, but sometime look at all of the different musical and pop culture responses to 9/11, and some are like Toby Keith angry response, and some are Bruce Springsteen My City in Ruins. There's like really interesting
yeah,
ways that people process that, but widely regarded as like, well, this was enough of a thing that people weren't politicking for like for 3 or 4 hours that afternoon. They weren't at each other's throats.
yeah. I was telling my kids about it the other day and about how that afternoon, I'll never forget, I was in a car, I headed back home, listening to like just a pop radio station, and they're playing the national anthem in the middle of the day. What a crazy time of, like you said, complete unity. You know, the guy in North Dakota was an ally with a New Yorker. Like
Yeah,
everybody was an ally of each other. Yeah.
yeah. It's fleeting. It doesn't last. It was
No.
a, it was a really interesting time. Our boys were young at the time, and I think that what I'll take from that more than anything is thinking about, I think I thought in the moment, but we started with UFOs and we're now to 9/11. I think what I thought in the moment was, oh my gosh, the world that they live in is going to be so profoundly different than ours. And I guess in hindsight, it is, but it doesn't seem as different as it seemed in that moment to me.
Yeah. At the risk of being melodramatic about our little podcast here, this is why, hey, if we could all, like in the face of an enormous national tragedy, we could all put our differences aside and be one. You know, how important is all this crap that we're all yelling at each other about? I mean, I'm hopeful that we could have that same level of national unity without such a loss of life. And maybe, you talk about the UFO, maybe that would be it. Maybe if something like that happened, people would come together. I don't know. But, or, I mean, did we come together because we love each other and we're trying to come together, or was it forced? It was like a fear-based response.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate question. Was it personification and othering? You had an enemy to blame. I don't know what it was like. Pearl Harbor, I think probably sort of similar, because that was a pretty fraught time too. But we have real threats in this country. It's hard to put a label on exactly who that is, and that may be the complexity that makes it hard. We've certainly got threats. We also have it pretty good, and I think that prosperity, I know it's not universally applied to people, but prosperity has a great way of helping you lose focus on what's important.
Well, and there I think there's a every movie that you look at with the UFOs, it's usually they're here to hurt us in some way. But then there's some, I know when we were kids, there was one that they came in and they cured cancer and they did all this. Now I think over time they were going to screw us over somehow. I'm sure there was some plot at some point, but they're like some of the movies and such is that they're going to come in and they're going to fix everything. But then it becomes, if we were in a world where everything was fixed and there's no cancer and there's no adversity, well, what the hell is that? I mean, we have friends over and we were sitting outside talking today about retirement. Like, oh, it'd be great to be retired. And then it's like, we got a neighbor who retired and was retired for a little while. And he's like, yeah, after a week of sleeping in and playing golf, it's like, I don't want to do that the rest of my life. Like if everything is perfect and you don't have to do anything, what is life? I mean, part of what drives us is the challenges, right?
Yeah,
Would life be
I honestly
interesting if
think
we
that's
didn't have
true.
something to disagree about?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think it does. I think having to strive for something as a nation has a way of straightening you out. And in some ways, I guess I don't know. I think I'd feel better about it thinking that to some degree, this nonsense that we're going through is just the natural outcome of a country where we've worked through the, we don't have bread lines, right? It's not perfect for everybody, but we've worked through the really big, horrible problems. We got rid of slavery. We don't have a Great Depression rocking. We've got Social Security so that old people aren't begging in the store. Like we've worked out some of the really big ticket items, and the vitriol of politics is necessary because the differences are not really that consequential. You got to find ways to separate yourself.
One thing I would say, I think actually Kamala Harris has a plan for bread lines. I think she's going to bring those back with the price fixing. So I think there might be a plan to bring those back. That would be helpful, you know.
Good news. Good news. It might be ambitious at this stage of our podcast to tackle UFOs, but nothing ventured, nothing gained.